So now I would like to start with the plenary session, undergraduate students' perspectives on learning and well-being during the pandemic, and introduce our session chair, Virajita Singh. Virajita is an associate vice provost at the Office for Equity and Diversity and professor at the College of Design at the University of Minnesota. I've met Virajita in 2019 at that canceled symposium, and she came because she was already on the plane when we canceled, and I had a chance to learn about her fantastic work. She uses SERU data extensively to inform discussions about equity and decisions about equity and inclusion on campus. And Virajita, I'm not sure, I don't see you, but I think that you're here. I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Igor, and thank you, John Douglas. It's great to see you both and see everyone in this session. Thank you for the opportunity to facilitate this session, especially this long-awaited SERU symposium. I just wanted to apologize. As I talk, you may hear planes moving overhead. I live on the flight path, and we're still in COVID, but maybe it's a good sign that the flight path is picking up, right? Things are getting back to normal. So I'm going to invite in a minute the panelists to introduce themselves, so they give us a sense of who they are and where they're from. But before that, I wanted to start with saying that this last year, for those of us around the world, has been momentous, but also in the United States in unique ways. And I'll mention the two pandemics that are on many of our minds. One is COVID. It's completely disrupted and transformed our lives. And then the second, of which I and my colleagues here today know well, at the University of Minnesota, we were the epicenter of the George Floyd's murder, which also was a seismic and tragic event that also has transformed many campuses and caused a lot of soul searching and so on. So we see the issues of campus climate kind of connected. So in this session, we wanted to make sure we recognize that and bring that to the table as well. One of the things that I personally am committed to is the issue of bringing student experiences and recognizing how important students are to the work of advancing, at least in my context, equity and diversity, but also betterment of our delivery of higher education in general. And so this session, I was thrilled to hear that it was being planned, and thrilled to be invited to facilitate, because it really brings the part that is so intrinsic to SERU's work, the data, right? And actually bring voices to the table that can actually speak to individual experiences. Oftentimes those get lost in the kind of analysis of like hundreds of voices into data. And so to hear individual voices here will be really useful. So I'm hoping this will be a really engaged session. Please feel free to add your questions to the discussion, either by chat or unmuting yourself as you feel appropriate. I do have some questions here that I'm going to start with, but I'll also be welcoming questions as they come. So please, invite any thoughts or questions that you might have and ask our presenters or our panelists. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Cassie Cudahy.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you for having me today. It's really an honor to be here. My name is Cassie Cudahy. I am a student at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I'm going to be a rising junior, and I'm majoring in communication, minoring in English. And on campus, I'm involved in a few different organizations. I'm a part of the Scarlet Ambassador program, which is our undergraduate admissions program. I'm also a part of the programming boards, which was an interesting experience in this past year since we were completely virtual. Planning virtual events is very interesting. And also I'm involved at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. I've interned there this past year, and it was a really great experience.
Thank you, Cassie, and welcome. I'll ask Regan Smock to
Yes, hi all. My name's Regan Smock. I'm a rising senior at the University of Iowa, and I study sociology and Spanish. And outside of school, I serve as the undergraduate student body president, and I'm doing some honors research right now. So getting very familiar with Stata at the moment.
Thank you and welcome, Regan. Next, we'll go to UAE. Chair.
Hello, my name is Yue Che. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a rising senior at the University of California, Berkeley. I major in geology with a minor in climate science. And on campus, I'm involved with the Cal Marching Band. And I'm also doing my senior thesis at Yosemite throughout the past year.
Thank you so much and welcome, UAE. And finally, we go to BJ Roberts from Minnesota.
Hello, everyone. My name is Braden Roberts, but I also go by BJ, he, him, his. I am a recent graduate of the University of Minnesota. I've gotten a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology of Law, Criminology, and Deviance. I served as an orientation leader, as a residential assistant, and within a bunch of leadership programs through the Leadership Minor and Leadership Enrichment programs here at the University of Minnesota. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. I'm going to start with a couple questions that are related. When thinking of campus climate, what are topics that come to mind for you? And what aspects of campus climate came to the fore in the last year on your campus? And maybe we can start with you, BJ, since you're already here.
For sure, definitely. When I think about campus climate, I think about, for me, what it means to be related to. I think about relatability, how often you can come across people who share, I don't know, maybe a similar mindset to you or even a different mindset to you, but the willingness to coexist. So navigating different similarity, I think about campus climate as how well the students, the staff, and the faculty can create that experience.
Would anyone else like to respond? Maybe I can start by naming. Okay, Cassie, I see you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, something that came to mind for me, and especially in this last year, is student well-being and student mental health, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And I think kind of seeing the way that if students were virtual, how they were interacting with the campus environment from home versus being in person, and what resources were being offered to them. So that's something that I definitely, there was a lot of conversation amongst myself and my fellow classmates about that.
Great. Regan?
Yeah, I would say my biggest word for the last year is equity. From a student government perspective, we worked on a lot of stuff like having an airport shuttle and a textbook drive. And then with like in a day, it felt like we were trying to make sure students are going to like feel safe on our campus from the virus and from that they feel included and like accepted at our campus. Students were like afraid to leave and not have on campus, but afraid to come to campus. And international students were like dropping their classes because they couldn't get textbooks. So when I was the director of academic affairs at that time, and we worked really hard to advocate for a pass-fail option, and through that every turn you made, it just felt like it was illuminating the inequalities in every sense of the COVID-19 kind of was impacting students of color more. Students who are low income were more likely to need a job, to need a roommate and feel unsafe. So really looking at the way, and then once you see that stuff through the COVID lens, I don't know that I'll ever be able to unsee the way that the structural inequality will always play a role in the things we do. So a good perspective and something to think about moving forward.
Thank you, Regan. Krista, thanks for adding that BJ also co-authored the SERU COVID-19 policy brief. Maybe there's things you can share, BJ, as you go of that experience too. I think UAE, would you like to speak to the question?
Yeah, I feel my perspective before COVID and after actually changed. Because if you asked me before COVID, I would probably say like, oh, like how I feel among my friends, my peers in class, people who I interact with daily. Do we have good vibes? Is everybody doing okay? I definitely agree with like mental health, equity, all those things, but it's more limited to the people who I interact face to face. But after COVID, I definitely see the school put more effort into serving the entire student body and staff member and faculty. And it really broadens my idea of who I am in a community with. And although some of my friends are more distanced, we don't talk as much as before, but it really made me realize that everybody on campus is one whole group, and every student on campus is feeling the same thing that I am feeling. So there's a sense of unity and community that is like wider. And although I don't know these people, now when you ask me about campus climate, it's definitely, even the students I don't know, I never speak to, they are part of my campus climate and they matters as well.
That's very well put. We all went through a similar experience, and that kind of brought the sense of unity, even as we had our individual challenges. I'll start with you and go back the other way. What was the most challenging as well as the most positive thing for you during the pandemic? And you can think about it in two ways. One is about the learning experience, and then generally the student experience as well.
I definitely, for me, I feel I faced more challenge like for my extracurricular activities, because I am in marching band. Normally during a season, although we have 200 people, I know everybody's name, and I can say I'm really good friends with most people in band. But then in the past year, like I don't know the incoming new members' names now, because some of them we never spoke to each other, and we don't have band rehearsal and the normal things to bond us together. We had so less activities, and I am at leadership position in band, and I feel my personal experience is students in leadership position is easier to get engaged in those activities during the pandemic. But if you are just a normal member in a student club, it is really hard to gauge your interest and to get involved in the things. Yeah, because I do realize a lot of student leaders around me are still doing things, but my roommate who wasn't a student leader in the fall, she didn't do as much as I did. But I'd say the benefit I get from being online and quarantine is I connected with a lot more scholars within my major and area. Because before quarantine, I have so many social responsibilities outside of school. I will probably not go to like a seminar in my department, but since the seminar in the department is still happening last fall, but my other club activities are have lower responsibilities. I started to go to those, and it really like changed my mind of how those things are. And like before, I just thought, oh, how can I like go there, right? Like stepping into a room with all like professors and graduate students seems really intimidating. But now it's just a click away in a Zoom call, and I just go in, and afterwards I can like talk to the professor who come to make the seminar and really connect with them, ask questions. Like it is nothing that I've experienced before. So I think that is a benefit Zoom gave me.
Well, that's wonderful. Heartwarming to hear about that, actually, impact. Before I transition, there is a question. What instrument do you play?
I played clarinet for like 10 years of my life, but my marching band need more tuba players. So I also learned tuba for my marching band.
Oh, that's great. It's team spirit. Thank you. So I'll go on to Cassie.
This is a great question, and I agree with a lot of the points that were brought up before. I think that The most challenging thing for me was the lack of socialization, being completely virtual from home, doing my classes, because you didn't get that interaction in classes. You were in a Zoom call and you just saw all your classmates as participants, and it just felt very lonely. I think my professors did a really good job at holding office hours and making sure that they were reachable throughout the semester. But I think just not having that peer-to-peer contact, or, seeing people on campus, I felt like the only socialization I had was through my involvement. And I really had to make an effort to remain consistent with going to club meetings and things like that. And it's hard not to get like Zoom fatigued. I think the positive thing for me during the pandemic, and honestly, I don't know how I'm going to go back, is kind of not being able to be in two places at once, but being able to double stack meetings and go to various events, because the way that it works at Rutgers, we have a bus system and we have 5 different campuses. So it's virtually impossible to go to multiple things per night. If you want to go to a lecture and an event, it's just not possible. But I was able to make that work this year, which was really, really wonderful, because I was able to gain all these awesome experiences. And now I'm thinking, wow, I really overbooked myself. How am I going to go back to in person? So I'm very grateful for that experience this year. And I definitely think that having Zoom meetings was positive. And I'm just excited to see how it's going to work out next year, because I think I'm going to have to cut back on some priorities, but it was great while it lasted.
Thank you, Regan. It seemed like we came close to being in 2 places at once, right? Didn't we, this whole year? So I'll ask Regan to go next.
Yeah, I think my challenge came purely in the classroom. It was a really hard year to learn. I really, really struggled, and I don't think anyone on our campus was talking about how this is not a normal way to learn. And I just have so much empathy for the first years who came and thought, I am not good at school. And that's not true. Like, it's really hard to learn in that environment, I think. So I also had 0 in-person classes. I did a hybrid, but I have not been in a classroom in a year. So I really miss that kind of real connection and discussion that can happen in a classroom that I don't think can ever happen in a Zoom room the exact same way. So I'm really excited to get back to that. My positive is really similar to UAE's, of like, I made connections this year with faculty in my, like, just my professors who will like probably write me letters of recommendation that I don't know that I would have, like, I may have had that if there was no pandemic, but I think, but somewhere between like having more to do and feeling like it's more accessible to go in those office hours. And if you get nervous, you can just end the meeting. It just feels less pressure. And I think that you can build relationships in that way. So it's good to look at the positive as well.
Great. It seems like the next stage for us is figuring out what hybrid feels like, right? Yeah. So that I'll turn to BJ next. And after you answered the question about the challenging and the positive thing, there's also a question in the chat for you about your personal experience and your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say between the learning and student experience combined, the most challenging and the most positive thing was the mindset switch. It was recognizing the agency I had in every decision, every moment, and letting go of the things I couldn't control. You know, nobody expected the pandemic, but here I was, a very opportune time to take my education into my own hands personally. I was actually able to graduate in 3 years instead of 4 by speeding up the process once the pandemic was rolling around. You know, I saw the opportunity and I decided to take it. And that's really helped me. It's helped me reframe a lot of other things in my life as well, just because the pandemic has affected so many people in so many levels. So not just as a student, but as an employee, as a sibling, as a son, you know, I have opportunities to say, okay, wait, but what can I control? You know, I can only do this, I can only do that. And that's really helped me. But during the pandemic, having that physical disconnect from people, that was something I could not change. That was something I really had no control over. And I just had to kind of learn to cope with, to deal with it or find alternatives. And I relied a lot on social media, but it was just kind of gaining that resilience to have the mindset switch to go forward. And yes, to John's question in the chat, I would say the SERU data, it showed a lot of, what's the word I'm trying to say? It showed a lot of interesting, but also not surprising results as far as indigenous populations, like the American indigenous population and Pacific Islanders. There were just, I know that Minnesota, we do a great job in acknowledging our history as far as being a land grant institution. And we are making waves as far as how to kind of equitize the history of everything. And at the same time, from what I saw in my experience, I just knew that it was a call for more work to be done, more improvements to be built upon. And that goes for everything as well. So it, I would say it was pretty standard.
Thank you, BJ. First, I wanted to acknowledge how remarkable it is, the way you talked about reframing and the actual work of reframing your experience. It's not something that comes easily. And I think maybe others agree with me, even as maybe especially as an adult, it's harder to reframe the challenges and see them. It takes a lot of time and hindsight to get to that point. So it's very powerful to hear you talking about that, and how just that act of reframing now has opened, it sounds like to me, doors for how others, how you navigate through life, but also perhaps you're being also a very positive influence on others. So thank you for that. Very powerful. What you said at the end about the universities, where it is and where it needs to go, brings me to my next question. But before I get there, I wanted to encourage our audience to kind of be ready to ask questions, either in the chat or by unmuting after this next question that I asked. So, or two questions. What was the most valuable thing that your university did to support you? And I want to take pressure off by saying, if there's nothing that comes to mind, it's okay. Just putting it out there. And what are things that universities started doing during the pandemic that they should continue doing? And this is really an important, like, as we go into the next stage of whatever phase we are in, what should we keep in mind? So maybe we'll start with you, BJ, because you're talking right now.
Of course, I think the most valuable thing that the University of Minnesota did for my experience was allow the option of choice and more agency to professional staff, to professors, and allow for more of a human experience. For example, I actually had the pleasure of working with Dr. Krista Soria, who was on the call, and she really made it evident to me as I went into my third and final year of what it means to relish the human experience in the classroom. Kind of letting teachers and professors decide to take that step back and choose to acknowledge the humans and the trauma that we are all experiencing in the world. That was just so powerful for me, and it allowed me to kind of, I don't know, it allowed me to be more inclined, to be more involved, to be more connected. And I think there were just a multitude of benefits that came with connection. So.
Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me that there's things that we can do collectively as an institution, but it also matters what each of us does, right? Like the faculty members you mentioned with Krista, giving permission or opening possibilities and agency along with the institutional moves. So thank you for that. Regan, what do you think?
My point is really, really similar to that as well. Because I was kind of reflecting on this question of what did the University of Iowa do? But I think I was really lucky to be studying what I was studying and have professors who study inequality and the human experience, because I have a lot of friends who study STEM, or I had a couple of people who I talked to who are just in those big introductory courses where we call weed out courses, right? Where like a percentage of the students are going to fail. And the biggest difference, I guess, I heard and what I was trying to disseminate is my professor said the word COVID. They said, this is not normal. They shared their experience, I guess, of like, this is what I'm struggling with right now. And that stuff was like invaluable to keep going, to feel like I could tell them if something was going on and I needed a little time away. I just felt this level of flexibility that I had never felt at college. I had never asked for an extension on a deadline. So I think I feel much more trusting in that. As far as things to go forward, I've never heard feedback like the way that students like recorded lectures. And I will personally talk about this too, like my finals week, going back and being able to remember what your professor said and remember that topic. And now I understand it from a different perspective because I've built on it. Going back and rewatching that, like, I think I did better on my final exams than I ever had. Students said that they just felt better about being able to, like, I don't feel good, I'm not going to watch my lecture today, but I'll watch it next week. And some professors are really hesitant to do that, but that was really positive feedback. And then I think in general, just the hybrid options have to become the normal. The one thing I'm really thinking about that we got feedback on is counseling services. So about half the people I talk to really like sitting in their room. I don't have to go into that building. I don't have to, no one can see me going to counseling because there's so much stigma. And the other half, like if you're living with a roommate or you don't want someone to hear your therapy session, they really want to be able to go and engage in an in-person environment. So I think it applies to like everything under the sun, but that's a pretty good example of how we've learned a lot with Zoom and the things that are possible.
That's great. I mean, the point you made about re-listening to the lectures, right? I mean, it's really a question of accessibility too, right? I mean, people learn in different ways and so on. So I think it's also a myth for to say that only in person is the best way, because we do live in these multiple, modalities and technologies available. And so, as you mentioned, hybrid needs to be the next, or the become normal. That's sort of, maybe that's our big challenge now. Like, how do we enter into the hybrid mindset when a lot of us may be thinking that we want to go back, but there is no going back? And so how do we enter the new hybrid normal, I guess? So Cassie, would you like to comment?
Yeah, and Reagan brought up some really great points, and I think like flexibility and accessibility definitely make me think about what Rutgers did to support the student body. I think first, they really listened to the students when they asked for things, or students got together and came up with solutions to kind of help them, because I think a lot of students struggle this year academically. So Rutgers provided pass no credit options in case if a student felt like they did not want to choose like the letter grading scale, which I thought was great and was really understanding, because I know personally I have a lot of friends in my life who attend Rutgers and it was a difficult semester for them. So hearing that the school is flexible and listening to the students, and I think Rutgers always listens to their students, but especially about like personal struggles, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, meant a lot. I also think that Rutgers was really great with providing mental health resources. I think they listened to their students in that capacity because, again, students were having a tough time this semester because outside of the classroom, we have a global pandemic happening. So we would receive a lot of emails about ways that we could be supported through counseling services or other resources on campus. And I just think that knowing that our university was listening to us and things that we were saying, or petitions that were being signed, or emails that were being sent were actually being read, meant a lot. So I really hope that that continues in the future, because I think sometimes that student to even administrative chain can be frustrating. So that those concerns were being listened to meant a lot.
Because you mentioned emails, I'm going to fold in this question here that we received. What are the best ways for universities can reach out regarding support for students, because they've been overwhelmed by the amount of students they've received during the pandemic? So any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think a lot of the emails, and I hope everyone else can probably speak on this too, a lot of the emails that I receive are like really big letters from some administrative person who I do not know, from some department that I am unaware of. And I know a lot of the stuff that's going on at my school, but there are these really lengthy emails and your email just fills up with them. So I think email is a great way to communicate, but I also think text notifications are another great source of information. And if they can be lessened, if they can be a little less formal, like a letter, and more just like giving the exact information that students need, I think they would be a little bit more well received. I just think for some reason in this past year, my email inbox has been very full, and I consider myself to read everything, like to be a person who reads everything, but it has been getting a little bit more overwhelming because there's just so much information coming out.
That's wonderful. I think, again, in the 140 character social media world, right? I mean, I guess it's a strategy I hadn't thought of, that you could send a text notification that also has a link to the longer description where you could read at your leisure rather than being daunted by these, massive emails. That's really very interesting. UAE, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Cassie, and I definitely feel like there's different informations that students want to hear, right? Because there's emails that I get, it's like, so there's like maybe like a new dean in a college that I am like never a part of, and it's like super lengthy, and I don't care who this person is. I know like they probably really deserved a long email to congratulate them, but also I don't really care. But on the other hand, I would really appreciate when the school is very timely telling us about their changing policy, or like even if they have a town hall, or they being very transparent about how they are making decisions. Like those emails, I will take my time to read it and like really appreciate the school, like the school leadership being really transparent. And I feel when I heard this question, the email that popped into my head is UC Berkeley had a newsletter email called Response and Recovery. And it's basically a newsletter email all centered around COVID, everything about COVID, different policy change on campus, off campus, and COVID data on campus, off campus. And I just feel that kind of communication is really good. And I'm like, the newsletter come every week, and I'm always like waiting for the newsletter to read it. I am super excited to see what the school's policy change. And myself is an international student, so I am especially caring about those school policy change, because it decides whether I can go back home or not for the summer, or if my friends back in China can come back to the US. Like I really care about these issues, and I just really glad that the school is sharing those information as soon as they make the decision. And even sometimes if it's not at the time to send out the newsletter, they just shoot us an email saying, hey, there's a policy change. Student organization can have in-person stuff at this date. Like as a student leader, I really appreciate that as well, because when the school administration, they make decisions, the student leaders in different clubs will make our own decisions to like move things forward, because at the marching band, we have training in the summer to get ready for the football season and so on and so forth. So like, I feel before pandemic, I never actually cared about these school decisions. They just seem like people higher up making their own decision. Maybe there's wildfire and I just don't have class for like a couple of days, like that's it. But now I just feel like COVID has brought some relationship further, but also others closer. And I really care about these issues, and school being transparent about how they're deciding, what is a process, who I need to talk to express my need or to follow up with things is like just really important for me.
That's powerful, because you're also talking about more engagement and different kinds of engagement, and perhaps an exploding of some barriers that may have been there. So that's powerful. While you mentioned in the international context, I wondered if you had any perspectives on how this felt from an international student perspective, and what you've been hearing from other students, because I think it posed incredibly unique challenges in this time.
Yeah, definitely. I feel so my personal experience is ever since the pandemic, which is around like March. Well, I came back to school like in January 2020, and I haven't been back home like ever since. I just stayed in Berkeley this like whole a year and more. And it's like, I feel a big challenge for the international students. It's just, there's so much things that we can't control. Like I see my peers who is California residents, they just go back home on an hour ride. But I can't do that. And really like small things, like if I can see my parents, depends on what China government and the US government has agreed on, whether there's flights. And even if there is flights, there's so much financial barrier for us to fly in and out. And I know a lot of international students are not like the poorest people in their country because of the high tuition in the US, but also because of the high tuition, we don't really have a lot of spare money for us. When the flight tickets skyrocket like 10 times the usual, we can't spend that money to go back home. So there's like a lot of logistic concerns for international students. And like, I feel for me and for people around me, like going into the pandemic, more and more is just, we want to go back home and we want to like see our families and friends. But then like everything is changing. So we are always following up with the news, but everything is changing. Or like I have several plans of going back home, but I never did. And it's just like extra concerns, like than a normal student, I feel, because other students, they don't have this concern. And then it actually made me realize a lot of other justice and equity calls, because me as an international student, I come from a place where there aren't a lot of racism in the society, because we don't have those people within us. And when I first came here, I had a hard time understanding what is racism in the US and why we are doing things. But then I just realized, like, for me, I need to spend extra time outside my school where I can be studying for exam, or I can be following like Japanese embassy to see if I can have a transfer flight from Japan. And I just realized there's so many other things that we need to worry about when there is when there is inequity in a system, or when there's an inequity in a situation. And we could have used this time to do other things that other people are doing, but we're not. And this is just a barrier that we all carry. And I definitely don't want to say my experience is other people's experience, but I definitely feel more connected to those issues. And I care a lot more because now I can relate and understand what they're going through.
Thank you so much. You raise a very important points, especially about the connection while being in country, right? I mean, oftentimes as international, and I myself came as an international student years ago, we are still learning the, sort of the context, and we are also taught by the systems of power, you could say, about what society is. And just actually being able to see and understand, because also in the international context, we do have differences and we do have inequities. They just take different forms. I mean, I come from India and caste is a huge issue there and so on. But race is not necessarily present. And so this growing understanding, and I think campuses, at least my campus, is trying to connect the dots between international students and domestic students and around equity issues and so on, but there's still more work to be done. So thank you for sharing that as well. So I think I'm going to combine a couple questions we've received here, and maybe we can go to BJ next. And I think let's start thinking about the new normal, right? Like if we're going to this, whatever it is in the fall and beyond. So one question was about supporting mental health of students. What has been helpful, would have been helpful. So I think I'm going to frame it as what might be helpful going in the future, into the future, supporting mental health, but also what would be most helpful for instructors to think about to support your learning. So maybe we can start with BJ, especially now that you've graduated, you can say anything you want, BJ.
Yes, I suppose that is true. No, as the pandemic was really taking off in March of last year, I remember thinking that if there was anything to be excited about, it was that there would be changes revealed, or there would be inequity revealed, and ushering in like a bunch of different changes, a bunch of um, ways to kind of go for that equality that we want to achieve. And so when I think about mental health, I think about meeting people where they're at, acknowledging that sometimes situations and emotions and illnesses aren't things we can control. They're things we have to learn to deal with. And having other people acknowledge that, having professional staff, having professors acknowledge that, and creating the space for grace, like just kind of pulling back on whatever the previous normal was, allowing that room for flexibility and accessibility even, that was the most helpful thing to me. I think about the hybrid model in the classroom, especially, but that also means new needs. It means technological security. Am I going to have Wi-Fi that's going to connect if I'm asked to go to a live lecture? You know, am I going to have sustainable connection to watch a lecture all the way through if it's pre-recorded? Am I going to be able to know everything before a test comes? These are the things we need to start thinking about, and they will be tying into the stress that students feel as a part of the classroom experience if those needs aren't being met. And so that's the new normal I think about. It's the big changes we want to make to institutions, like the idea of education and how we can support those more permanent needs going forward. And for me, it's creating grace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Regan, what do you think?
Yeah, on the topic of mental health, this is just a really, really hard thing to tackle. But in some of this may be unique to Iowa, but students don't always report like the highest trust in UCS, mostly from anecdotal, or that's our university counseling services. Sorry, I'm bad with my acronyms. Especially students of color. There's 4 therapists of color and a couple that speak a language other than English, but I think it's been a really hard thing to navigate, understanding that like with mental health, especially around like social identities, there's only so much that someone who does not have your experience can tell you to make you, and I think so often sometimes it's like it can seem dismissive because it's just 2 different experiences. So trying to find a way to like bridge that gap, and I think it's something we're working on. And then I like anecdotally, I've had really close friends who don't want to utilize any kind of mental health services, either because they're too expensive, like off campus. Our on-campus service you can use 8 times and then you cannot use it anymore. So some people don't want their insurance to show up on their family's like credit card because it's so stigmatized, and maybe that's an Iowa thing compared to the rest of the world. But I think some of the work we have to do is just destigmatizing. And then University of Iowa has done some really cool stuff around utilizing different kinds of mental health. So I think in the United States, we say, go sit in a room and talk to a person for an hour. And that's the only way to change the way you're feeling. But they've really utilized different kinds of counseling from all over the world. So like, I think especially Eastern cultures, they started doing what's called Let's Talk Hawks. And you can come in, it's anonymous, and you can drop in and talk to someone for 15 minutes about your class or whatever. And those are really underutilized, but I think they're going in the right direction of that. It's the same thing as that hybrid thing of like, you want the most flexibility that you can, especially with like mental health is scary for students. I think it's something you just don't talk about enough. And then really switching gears quick with the supporting your learning, my only advice on that is to just really emphasize that faculty in those like secondary, like sophomore year courses, 3rd year courses, really think about their students. There's pretty good chance that their students are going to come in and they're going to have missed some really big concepts or tools that they were supposed to learn last year when a lot was happening. So being patient, checking in on things that you probably shouldn't have to check in on, but hopefully your academics build on each other. And I think that I'm really worried about students having missed some of those big blocks and then struggling in classes when they get a bit more difficult.
Thank you. It sounded like, oh, yes, I just one thread I wanted to say, that the whole thing about grace that BJ mentioned is also what you're saying, right? But also this intentional checking in rather than plowing forward, sort of stopping and doing that. And then it's good to hear about the Let's Talk, because my campus has also started that, but it's almost like a small micro, right? Like micro intervention in terms of helping students. So that's another strategy. So Cassie, next.
I also was going to ask, because I have a few points in my head. Could you repeat the question just so I'm making sure?
Sure, absolutely. And sorry, I know time goes by. And lots of conversations. So I guess one of the questions was around mental health supports, and I was framing it as, what we can do going forward to support student mental health. But then the second is about instructors supporting your learning, and again, moving forward, how do we do it?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I was on the right track. So first, I think with instructors supporting student learning, something that I really appreciated this year is the material was presented to us in a bunch of different formats, and we haven't had that in previous years. I actually took an intro to education class because I'm kind of like on the fence, maybe I want to be a teacher, but we learned about universal design learning. And I think that a lot of people talk about that in younger grades, like elementary school. How can you present a child with a story in a bunch of different formats? You can show it to them in a video, on paper. You can play it for them and they can listen to it. And then I think a lot of educators kind of forget about that as the children in that elementary school classroom grow older. And I think something that I saw this year is that a lot of my professors tried to create unique opportunities for us, even if we were in a completely asynchronous, pre-recorded lecture. One of my professors, who I still am in contact with right now because she's just a wonderful supporter, she would hold weekly office hours where she would actually review the material that was covered in the virtual lectures that were completely pre-recorded. And that allowed some communication amongst myself and my classmates, but also allowed me to connect with my professor. Another professor also did these types of videos where you had to like answer questions after you watched certain segments. So it made sure that you were engaged. And then there were certain like read along things where you would read an article and it could either read it to you or you could read it yourself, and you can interact with it in different ways and highlight. And I just did not experience that my first year here at Rutgers. And I'm not really sure if that was because the opportunity was not presented to show the learning material in different formats, or if this just gave the professors like an opportunity to try out these different tools. But I think definitely moving forward in this new normal, if more of like a universal design learning approach could be taken, I think that would be really beneficial because not everybody learns in the same way. And while this new format was difficult, I think that a lot of the professors tried to make it like easier to grasp for certain students. And then with mental health resources, I think that Rutgers did a great job at trying to make sure that students had access to the resources that they needed. We have a program called CAPS, which is counseling and therapy. I'm not good with acronyms either, but it's basically counseling services. And one thing that a lot of my friends said was it was difficult to get an appointment there in person because a lot of the times they booked up really fast. We have a lot of students at our school. So I think moving online and having that almost like hybrid format where students could either go in, schedule a video call or a phone call allowed for more flexibility. So I think hopefully moving forward, they present students with those options so that eventually everybody will have the ability to access the resources, especially mental health resources that they will definitely need, especially as we come onto campus in the fall, because I'm sure a lot of students are anxiously anticipating, the return to campus in the fall after not having been there for a year and a half.
Thank you. I guess there was a question which I'll ask you. Did faculty support you beyond learning, sort of social life during the pandemic? What was your sense of that?
Absolutely. Actually, personally, and I'm very comfortable sharing this, I had a difficult year last year. My grandmother, she passed away in January, but basically from March 2020 to January 2021, her health was declining, and that was a very difficult thing for me to handle on top of all my school year. schoolwork, excuse me. And one of my professors in the School of Communication, I would go to her office hours and she would ask me how I was doing. And she was just an amazing support. And I really appreciated eventually when she received the news that my grandmother had passed away. We were on a phone call and the amount of support that I felt from her was just incredible. And it means a lot that teachers, or not teachers, professors, excuse me, are there for you, not only for your academic needs, but for your social needs, because it makes you feel like they care about you as a person. So I really appreciate that. And I feel like in this virtual format, again, there's a lot more flexibility to have those opportunities to connect outside of the classroom, because I think a lot of the times with in-person office hours, everybody wants to go. So it's like boom, 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 really fast. But online, you have those different opportunities. Again, they want to schedule phone calls because Zoom fatigue is a thing, or they email you, or they'll message you through like Slack or something else if your class is using that. So I just think definitely have felt that social support from professors. I don't know if it's been all of them, but definitely a majority of them have checked in on students as individuals, not just students in the classroom.
Thank you so much, and I'm deeply sorry for your loss. And but it's also heartening to hear that there were people and professors checking in and supporting. That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go to the UE to ask about again the mental health supports that we might do, and then learning going forward.
Yeah, I feel these two are pretty connected to each other. And I believe a lot of audience here are educators around different universities. And I feel from a student standpoint, I feel a lot of times people in university leadership, either in council in university or the dean of a department, or even just the professor that is in my class, they will have the concern that if they loosen up the requirement or provide more accommodation to the classroom, student will slack off. They will be lazier. They will not meet the deadlines. But honestly, what I see is these things will only help people, because students around me are driven. None of us come to college just to slack off, and none of us select this class just because we need to meet a requirement, because there are so many classes we could have chosen. We chose this class because we are really driven and we want to study hard in this class and to get the material. So when one day we enter the industry or higher in academia, we will have the tool to utilize. So like just saying, like, if you want to extend a deadline for a homework, or you see one of my professor, he saw a lot of students are not submitting homework in the middle of the semester. He's just like, yeah, if you still submit it, it still counts. And I'm going to drop like 3 lower scores so you can submit more that doesn't meet the deadline, but I really want you to learn the material. Like just being transparent of the professor want us to learn the material, and we also really want to learn the material. Sometimes being flexible and to create more options will just make people's life easier. And this really ties to a lot of people's mental health, because we have so much responsibility. Sometimes it's just a really small deadline that we really need to meet, but then we need to help out with our family or our friends in the house that is going through some crisis, and we just can't meet this deadline. That is a point that I want to bring out. And another thing I feel that is important that haven't been touched yet is what message the leadership from the university is delivering. Because for me personally, I last year in January, when I arrived in Berkeley, I know that COVID is a pandemic in China, and I just like put on my mask, going everywhere. I don't think I contacted with anyone with COVID, but because I come from a country that is currently under pandemic, I just did that. But then a lot of people will give me weird looks. And there are times when professors say, hey, can you take off your mask? I can't hear what you're saying. Even I am speaking out really loud and repeating myself. I just feel like at that point, my mental health was pretty bad because I am wearing mask and being precautious about things, but nobody else around me, especially those in power, like university did not acknowledge there is a pandemic going on, like at the very beginning. And professors are not well equipped with the information they should have. And it really influenced me as an individual of how other people around me sees me. People are judging what I am doing, and it just made me really uncomfortable. But then nowadays, when we are opening up again, same thing happens when sometimes the people in leadership is delivering different messages to students, because now California has been opening up. But when my friends say, hey, do you want to go out for dinner? I will still have concerns like, should I not see my friends? Because like, although the California state has said that we open up, the university sometimes say, oh, we're still limiting access. It just made me really doubt of what should I do. It also made my peers doubt what is the expected behavior among us should be. And again, I think a lot of times the university is being really cautious about what they say, because there are some students that is like really excited for partying and gathering and going to places. But honestly, I feel if you really need those social interactions, what the university say does not really affect you. You can always get away with going things outside of the university. But university's attitude really influence of whether my peers judging me when I go to a restaurant, or even when it's back in person. Some of my peers are concerned, like, what if like the university still has mask restrictions, but I, as a person with some need for accommodations, I really don't want to wear a mask because of my medical condition, whatever reasons. Then the people around me who might not know the full story of me will judge me and make people's mental health feel really bad. I feel it's just really clear for the university to state in what case what will happen, and this is how you should do it. Is very important. And I feel it's like students listen to their teachers. And when things come out of the teacher's mouths and come off the university mouths, it sounds different and it hit differently. So I think it's important for university to make the rules clear of what to do, what to expect, so people have less confusion. Yeah.
Thank you, Yi. First thing, I'm sorry for what you experienced, and I am familiar with this. Even on our campus, there were incidents like that, and it also brought back great memories, or not great, but actually maybe bad memories of where we were in the trajectory of the pandemic, where mask wearing wasn't acceptable and seemed like an unusual step. And to the point now that where masks have become part of our daily wear, and to now this transitioning to this anti-mask. So you're reminding, and not to mention the national political scene and what that created in terms of also additional pressure for us on campuses, So thank you for reminding us about that. We have 3 minutes, and I did want to entertain a couple questions here and see if any of the panelists want to address it. There's a question about, do you see online courses being something for the future, or is it the hybrid? Because I think it seems like the SERU data has shown that students don't like online only. And then the second question is there something in the SERU questions that you wish you should have been asked and it hasn't been asked or asked well, and would you like to suggest something? So maybe if each of you responds very quickly in the next 2 minutes to any of this. UAE, do you want to start, and then we'll go through others?
Yeah, I can start real quick. So in the past year, I actually took several classes that I really wish I took it in person. At the geology major, I took petrology, which is the study of rocks. But at this point, I can't really tell you what a metamorphic rock looks like under a microscope, because that is the part that we went online. And I also took field geology online, which I think there's good things and bad things about it. I just feel when it's online, your focus is different. So for field geology, what normally would really focus on is your field skills to go out in the field, identify outcrop and see the rocks, and then hammer the rocks, and then map the area yourself in the field, putting something in 3D into a 2D environment. But those are not possible online. However, I do feel for me, I gained more computer skills in this class, because the class shifted its focus to more GIS, which is the satellite maps and stuff, the data processing part. And I feel I had rigorous training on that part. So
Right.
yeah, I'd say it's definitely a different experience.
That's great. Braden, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can definitely talk as far as online courses. I actually took an online course in the fall of 2019, right before COVID, and it was the hardest course I'd ever taken in my college career. And I think that has to do with the fact that I'm a relational person, and that humans are more than just social creatures. We're conscious creatures. You know, we strive for that conscious connection with others. Being talked to from lectures is not very conscious. You know, you don't get as much interaction out of that. You don't get as much you don't get any connection out of that. We talk to ourselves for more connection because we're conscious and we can recognize that. And so I think that online only courses, if they're like very specific and very small, not like at the same level of trying to teach an entire course in a semester, something smaller, maybe like a 6-week intensive course online only, I think is more viable than just a complete option in higher education.
Sounds good. So we are out of time, and I'm going to take this opportunity to express my gratitude. Thank you so much, BJ, Cassie, Cudahy, and Regan. Wonderful insights, and really, a few lessons in there for all of us on this call to understand in all our respective roles of faculty, administrators, researchers, part of campus communities. Thank you for your engagement and persistence and resilience this last year and a half, and also for sharing your valuable time and insights to us. And thank you also to the audience for your excellent questions and for listening. And hopefully you can reach out to Igor and John and others if there's further follow-up. Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to facilitate this.